Welcome to a special bonus episode of Self-Inflicted Aural Nostalgia. In this episode, I talked to Adam Shore. He was the A&R executive who signed Guided by Voices to TVT Records in the late 90s. While on the label, the band produced two of their best records, Do the Collapse and Isolation Drills. Adam tells me about the band's time on the label, what it was like to go from being a fan to working with the band, and why seeing GBV live is like going to church. Here's our talk. I am speaking with Adam Shore, the A&R executive who signed Guided by Voices to TVT Records. Adam, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
So I think you began your career at TVT and then went to Vice. All told, how long were you in A&R?
I did A&R for about 10 years.
Wow. And that seems like a pretty cool job. How is that something that people, get into?
When I was at TVT, I was hired right out of college to be a publicist. And I did publicity at TVT for way too long, much longer than I was happy for. I wound up being able to transition from publicity at TVT to product management, which is the marketing job where you lead and coordinate the marketing of an album.
Sure.
So working with the radio department and the A&R department and the advertising department, and coordinating all the efforts. So I did that for a while. And when I first started at TVT, it was only about 10 people. And when I left, there were at least 110.
Wow.
So the company grew really fast. And as it grew, there were a lot of opportunities for me to expand what I was doing. So I started in publicity. I then did product management for a while. Then we launched our first website, because this was back in the 90s, and I helped put that together. Then we started launching internationally, so I helped open up our records internationally. And then I started doing A&R, and it was my doing A&R there was kind of funny because I certainly signed the fewest artists probably of anyone who's ever done A&R at the label.
Sure.
I wound up at TVT. I wound up being responsible for about 30 records, but I did a lot of the TVT started as a company that made compilations of television theme songs.
Yeah.
I did 9 of those.
Wow.
I did compilations. I did reissues. I did soundtracks. So I wound up doing, we did label deals. We had a label deal with Ice Cube, a label deal with Snoop Dogg. I was the liaison between those records. So I wound up working on a lot of records, but I was only able to sign 2 bands. I signed Brian Jonestown Massacre and Guided by Voices, and that was it.
Wow.
But they were two of my favorite bands in the world. So I feel really lucky to be able to have worked with them.
Well, so before we start talking about GBV, were there some other bands who kind of got away that you really wanted to sign but just couldn't for some reason?
The truth is, I was really busy at TVT, working on all these other projects. So I think that I think people's perception of A&R is like, you're out in the clubs, you're
Sure.
talking to artists all the time, you're stumbling upon new bands. That's just not the way it was.
Okay.
I was working at my desk 12 hours a day, putting together these records.
Wow.
I only really, there were probably only 2 artists that I was really, really kind of forceful about really wanting to sign, and they were those 2 bands.
Wow. So how did you first hear of GBV? How did they come into your orbit? What was that first thing that you heard or you saw or of them?
It was probably the press that came around the Vampire on Titus Propeller twofer that came out on CD at the time.
Yep.
And just by reading about it just sounded like everything that I love in music all in one band. And I got that record and was pretty obsessed by it. And then the first time I saw them was on the Insects of Rock tour, which was
Wow.
their parody of the Monsters of Rock tour.
Sure.
And it was at this art gallery called Thread Waxing Space in New York.
Yep.
And I just like, I just kind of lost my mind at the show, and I continued to see them every single time they played New York. And literally at one time, at a show at Tramps, it was during the Not in My Air Force tour. I guess Bob did his first kind of non-GBV tour, and he said from the stage that they had just left Matador, and I remember thinking to myself, like, wait a minute, I do A&R, like I should try to see what's going on here. And so I found who their manager was, David Newgarden.
Sure.
And within 2 or 3 weeks, I had the Do the Collapse album, which they had been shopping around, I guess, to a couple labels, and I just loved it so much. And the label was, the label was run by a guy named Steve Gottlieb, who is a pretty notorious figure in music and not really a role model for anybody. And he did not, he didn't really think that that was a sort of band that he wanted to have on the label, that, they were old and, they were niche. And he wanted things that could have a wider reach, and I kept pressing him on listening to the music and spending time with the music. And I wrote him long emails about who they are and what they mean, and how they really are like, a 40-year history of rock music all condensed into one, and how the story is just the most incredible story I'd heard, where it's a band who, had made 7 records in their basement that no one ever heard, and now finally we're having notoriety, and he could quit his job after 14 years, and they're in this incredible live band. And I mean, I just thought everything was the most undeniable. I can't see why we wouldn't do it. And he kept not being interested. And then one day, right before Christmas, I made him a CD of just the song "Hold On Hope."
Wow.
And I said, I think this song is a hit. Let me know what you think. And it was amazing, because I guess it means he never really listened to Do the Collapse in a close enough way, because over the holiday he called me and he said, "Who made that song?
Wow.
That song's a hit." I was like, "This is Guided by Voices that I've been talking to you about all the time." And he's like, "All right, I think we should do this."
Wow.
And so that's how we wound up signing the band.
Wow, that's amazing. And I want to talk about Hold On Hope in a second too, because I know that's kind of a controversial song for the band, and so I want to sort of get into the history of that. But then what was their profile like in the history in the time? Because like in 1994, they were like everywhere, right? They were on MTV, there were all these stories, they were the underdogs, and there's a lot of competition to get them. But had that cooled down by 97, 98 when you started getting involved? What was their sort of profile like?
I mean, it cooled down in a way. I mean, I suppose they never reached that kind of like, critical acclaim again as the B-1000 Alien Lanes time. But Under the Bushes is an incredible record, and Mag Earwig is awesome. And that band was so much better as a live band, I thought, than the band that came before. And they were still, especially, it's hard for me to kind of gauge their draw and their following all around the country, but in New York City, they had such a diehard fan base where they could just come here every few months and play 3-hour shows and be incredible and get drunk, and the audience would get drunk and everybody would sing every word. I mean, it was really the kind of whether Mag Earwig was like maybe they were starting to kind of settle into just being the cult band that they are, but they were still just a live phenomenon and just had so many songs that were so incredible. So I never felt it at all. I just felt, and then Not in My Air Force came out, and I just thought that was amazing. And I mean, it was just to me, it was just like I just couldn't understand why every label wouldn't want to sign them.
Well, then, so how, from an industry perspective, so you've got a great perspective. You're a true fan. If you got into them in '93 or whatever, that's about as early as you could. And then you're also in the industry. How do you think? What do you think that Matador did or didn't do for the band? Do you think they handled them well? Do you think they missed some opportunities?
The only thing that it seems to me everything they did was right because the records came out and the touring grew and grew. But what I learned from when I first talked to David Newgarden, Guided by Voices manager at the time, was that Matador had made clear to Bob that they felt like he was releasing too much music. Mm-hmm. And that that consumers can't keep up, and it would be smarter in a career move to slow down the pace. But what was interesting was that they weren't really excited about letting Bob put out records on his own. Mm-hmm. So I thought that would have been the perfect solution. Matador gets the Guided by Voices records. Bob releases whatever else he wants under whatever name he wants on his own. But Matador did not want to do that. And that's an understandable record label position. I don't think that's completely unfair, but it just didn't really fit this one particular songwriter. The only other artist that I had signed to TBT was Brian Jonestown Massacre, which is a similar sort of situation where it's really a band that's led by one person who's an incredibly prolific songwriter, and at that time everything was just gold, and we also we didn't want to limit him, but what we were able to offer Bob was that we would put out Guided by Voices records, and other records that he wanted to do on his own, he would be welcome to put out on his own. And I guess that became sort of the offer that Bob was really looking for more than anything. Sure. And that's what we did.
And then sort of looking back, so you feel differently than Matador about that, explosion of material, and that didn't make a difference for you guys in terms of sales or, getting reviews or getting press. And did everyone at TBT share that opinion that Bob was welcome to do anything you wanted on the side as long as you guys got the GBV stuff?
Yeah, that was part of the deal from day one. And what was really gratifying for me was that once the band was signed to TBT, how much the staff at TBT just loved them. Like, wow. I think it was kind of this moment where at record labels, you kind of have two different types of people. This goes probably still now across the board. There's your kind of clock punchers who are in it for the job. They like music, but they're not obsessives. And there's the real obsessive music fans, and the music fans at TBT, I think they finally were able to say, like, wow, this is a band that we love, that we just love. Like, I think a lot of the bands were bands that they, needed to work, and they were the ones the A&R signed, and that was who the label was putting out. But this was a band where it seemed like everybody was like just so elated that they had a band that they could really, really love. Wow. And so the enthusiasm was really there from the beginning. And when we launched the Do the Collapse campaign, it was as big and as robust and as well financed as any record that TBT had put out.
Wow. So
at the time.
I want to talk about that in a second, but sort of staying on the subject of Pollard and all his side projects and stuff. So I know you guys had a first look option on the solo or the side project stuff. Do you remember getting any of those records in the mail, like Nightwalker and Lexo and the Lepers, and thinking, maybe we could put it out? Was that ever considered to try to do more than just the GBV stuff?
No, by the time, Do the Collapse was done when we received it, and we put it out, and then as you can imagine, not long after that we started getting the demos for what became Isolation Drills. So there really was never a feeling that we were missing out on stuff. Like, we were just doing the job on Do the Collapse, and the second that was done, we started setting up Isolation Drills.
Sure. So getting back to signing the band, I know you went to Dayton, right? To meet with them, and then who did you meet with?
Yeah, I went
Because
to,
there wasn't really a band at the time, right? This was after the Mag Earwig, so those guys were gone. Who did you meet with? What was that like?
right. I went right to Bob's house,
Okay.
and sat in his kitchen where he writes songs every morning. He explained to me his process, that he wakes up and kids go to school and he sits in his house in his robe and he drinks coffee and he sits at his kitchen table and he just writes songs.
Yep.
It's incredible. And then what else did we do? He drove me in his car and first we went to a drive-through liquor store, which was the first time I'd ever seen anything like that before. And then I guess we went to the Monument Club, which was his. Do you know my chronology better than me?
No, I only know that. So the Monument Club, that's his sort of drinking buddies. But I think he went to a very nice restaurant called the Pine Club, and you guys got kicked out.
We did. God Bless the Pine Club was that was written in the liner notes, and I asked him what that was, and he was really excited to take me to the nicest restaurant in Dayton.
And what happened when you were there?
I guess in retrospect, what happened was, it seems like from my understanding, Bob is he drinks to get over his own nerves and self-consciousness. Mm-hmm. I've definitely, I've worked with a lot of addicts in my life, and I assume that maybe under some definition, Bob has some issues with alcohol, but
sure.
My hanging out with him was he would never drink, certainly never drink when he was writing and working and in the studio. He was only drinking right before he gets on stage to kind of kill those nerves. Mm. And I guess maybe that night he drank a lot because he was a little rambunctious, and I don't know, he told me later that it was because he was sort of nervous because I was the label guy, and I was nervous the whole time because I'm the biggest Guided by Voices fan, and here I am in Dayton, hanging out with Bob and driving around in his car and going to his restaurants. It was just incredible. But I do remember that we did get kicked out of the Pine Club before we got to eat, and he wound up being too drunk to drive home. So a friend drove him home, and he asked me if I would take his car back to his house. And I got into his car and drove it home, and a cassette of Alien Lanes was in the tape deck.
Wow.
And I just loved that.
Wow. That's awesome.
So the only other real recollection I have of it was only the second band I signed. Brian Johnson Massacre was a very easy signing. Guided by Voices had a much more professional manager and a much more professional lawyer, and I was a relatively unprofessional A&R person. And I had just seen in record labels that how long the contract process takes. You get a contract and you sit on it for a while, and then you mark it up and you send it to a lawyer, and they sit on it for a while, and they mark it up, and it goes back and forth, and no one actually has a conversation. And I tried to create this scenario where I brought their manager, their lawyer, and our president of the company in a room together, and the five of us would bust out the contract in real time. And that's actually what we wound up doing. But it wound up being a pretty miserable experience for everybody.
Wow.
And the lawyers hated it because they couldn't be all passive aggressive, and they had to actually talk to each other. And we wound up doing the deal in pretty much that day. And then all those lawyers and the manager said to me, never, ever again would we ever do something like that, which I've never seen happen since.
I like it. You're getting it done. So speaking of the managers and stuff, I know that one of the things Matador's Gerard Kostler complained about was not being able to deal with Bob directly. There was always a layer of management between him and that main creative force of the band. On the ongoing relationship for you, what was it like? Were you able to deal more or less with Bob? Did you go through the manager? Did you feel that was a hindrance for what you needed to get from the band and the guys?
Yeah, I mean, I know that Matador definitely has, when they started the label, the kind of bands they signed didn't really have managers, so everything was a direct relationship with the label.
Sure.
Then once the whole indie rock industry started getting more professional, they always felt that managers were a hindrance. But the truth is, like, that is the case sometimes, but sometimes the management really is a help. And it's true that I didn't have a direct daily connection to Bob because Bob didn't use email.
Hmm.
And so, that's really the way, I didn't really have a lot of reasons to just talk to him on the phone about things. He was very professional and prolific and gave us music all the time. So, and gave us approvals all the time. So there was really nothing that was a hindrance. And I actually found working with David Newgarden to be incredibly helpful. Dave was a great manager and worked well within our systems, and we got along great. So no, I never had any of those problems at all.
Cool. So so they had Do the Collapse in the can, ready to go when you guys signed them. Did you want to make? Were there any suggestions made to the record in terms of song choice or song content, or was it just you just said this sounds great? This will be the first record.
Yeah, this was it. I mean, to me, there wasn't. It's true that maybe a more professional A&R person would have wanted to put his or her fingerprints on the record. I didn't think it was. I didn't really think it was my place. Mm-hmm. They had been doing this for 15 years. They know what they want. Also, it was Rick Ocasek produced it. Bob is Bob takes sequencing incredibly seriously. And to me, it was just a finished package. It was mastered and ready to go. Wow. That was the record they wanted, and there didn't really seem to be an opening or reason for us to have any feelings otherwise. And also, I think the fact that Rick Ocasek produced it gave the label a kind of like a sigh of relief. It was the first time that the band had really worked with a professional producer like that. Mm-hmm. And he was a pretty inspired choice. And certainly the production on Do the Collapse was a much kind of bigger, more professional studio production and all the records that came before. So no, we were really happy with the album.
Awesome. So let's talk Hold on Hope. So it's a real point of contention among fans. Pollard says it's his biggest mistake, and some critics really pounced on it as being this sellout song. I personally think it's a great song. But so it sounds like this is what actually got them signed to the label. But you're dealing with the band. What was their feeling about this being that song? I know there was some pushback from them. They didn't want to.
Well, first and foremost, it was obvious to everybody that Teenage FBI was the single.
Okay.
So we knew that was a song to go out on. They felt the same way. So we launched the campaign with Teenage FBI. It didn't really get us on alternative radio, I think, like we hoped. But then at the same time, even though we were a very big independent label, we're still an independent label. There's not a lot of spots for independent labels on alternative radio. There's not a lot of spots for indie artists on alternative radio. So I think everybody was a little disappointed that we weren't able to get the band over that hump. Actually, I'm not even sure what the perception of the band was, but I know internally we really thought that we had a chance on this song. It definitely, it got them on, we got MTV and, we got all the specialty shows, and we did great at college, and the album did incredible at college, and we certainly helped grow or continue or build Guided by Voices story. It's not like we put out the record and they it was a stumble, but now it was time for the second single, and that was when Steve Gottlieb, the president of the company, thought that now it's time to really do Hold on Hope the right way. There wasn't any pushback from the band otherwise. Okay. That was the plan. I think Bob did always have a love-hate feeling about that song, but even he knew that it was an incredibly well done song. I mean, he wrote it, I mean, it's his song. And it's an incredibly effective song, and Rick did a great job on the production. But what happened was that at the time there were two singles remixers that pretty much owned alternative and AOR radio. And if you had one of those two guys doing a kind of radio mix of your song, then you had a much better chance of the song being a hit. And so we cleared that with the band. They were okay with letting I am blanking on his name of who was the remixer. But he Bob and the band and David were okay with us giving it a shot with this remixer. The remixer did a more kind of radio version of it where there's more compression and you raise levels, and you kind of make it so it can slot better in between other songs on the radio. He also brought in John Bryan, who was not as a household name at the time, and John Bryan played Chamberlain on it and added an extra musical line to the song.
Wow.
It made it again like sound fuller and more like it would fit on the radio. That was not something the band was excited about, and ultimately is the band's decision over what we release. And so we played these radio versions to the band, and through management, we found out that Bob was incredibly unhappy with those mixes and did not want us to release them.
Wow. And have they ever seen the light of day? I don't think I've ever stumbled across them.
No, they don't. I don't. They have not. And then what happened is that when I went back to Steve Gottlieb and said, "Listen, I tried. I did everything I could. The band and management are not happy with these. They're happy to have us release the song. We should just go to radio with the album version." And Steve Gottlieb said, "There is not a chance I'm doing that. I've invested too much in this band. I'm going to release this single the way with this remix. You have to get their permission." He said, "Where is the band? Go talk to them tonight." And I said, "The band is in Manchester, England." And he said, "Get on the next plane."
Wow.
So
you
did.
Get on that plane, you go there.
So I get on that plane, and it's before a show, and they know I'm coming, and their guards are up.
Sure.
And we went to a pub, and it was the five guys in the band, and me, and I was wedged into the corner of a booth, and the five of them were circled around me, and I made as persuasive an argument as I could. And it was hard for me because, I truly believe that we should be doing what is best for the band. Mm-hmm. And I think that the one piece of criticism that I kept getting as an A&R person, and I think this is a pretty common thing with A&R people across the board, like to the label, I was another person in the band, and to the band, I was a suit at the label.
Sure, you're the man.
I think I was the man. I think A&R people are always that way. I made as persuasive an argument as I could. Probably not persuasive enough because I felt outnumbered. I felt a little intimidated, and I felt not really incredibly secure in the argument that I was trying to make. They got almost belligerent, I would say. They were furious that they had to have this conversation, and they accused me of not understanding the band, not caring about the band, not being a fan of the band, which was pretty crushing to me, considering I think at that point, before I signed them, I think I'd seen them in concert 20 times.
Wow.
And I'd never seen a band in even double digits before, and to have these guys that I love so much and that I've like worked so hard on to tell me that I don't care about them and that I don't understand them and I probably shouldn't even be working with them was a pretty harsh reality.
Oh yeah.
And so I went back to New York with, I still semi enjoyed the show that they did in Manchester. They're playing all these songs from, they're playing songs from Not in My Air Force, like Psychic Pilot Clocks Out. And I think they were playing Lexo and a Leaper song by then. And I still love the show. But I skulked back to New York with my tail between my legs. And I told the boss that they just refused to do it. And so we wound up releasing that second single, but there was there wasn't the campaign behind it. Sure. I think at that point the label was already like, you know what, if they don't want it, then we're not going to try.
Wow.
So we didn't really do a real robust radio campaign, and I'm trying to remember. I don't even think there was really a third single that we wound up working off that record.
Was it Surgical Focus?
Surgical Focus. That's right. Well, wait a minute.
Yeah, you did
With
a
Surgical
7-inch.
Focus, I think Surgical Focus actually came out in between those two things. I think we knew that Surgical Focus wasn't a single, but we also knew that there was such a rabid vinyl audience, and we had our art director was just so into the band and just had all of these ideas, and Bob really liked his ideas. So he created this idea of this kind of pinwheel Surgical Focus 7. Yeah. And of course Bob had all the B-sides ready to go. So we did that. So we did that Surgical Focus 7-inch, but that was really just like a kind of like gimme for the hardcore fans to keep stoking the hardcore fans as we would then try to take the band more pop and mainstream with Hold On Hope.
Sure.
So that didn't work, and then we went right into the next record.
Well, so then there were some reports of like Steve Gottlieb getting a bit hands-on with the band, like I think like Pollard turned in the songs for Isolation Drills, and Gottlieb was like, "You're holding out on me. I want you to write hit singles. Think Girls, think Cars, think Summer." Do you think the brush off he got with Hold On Hope made him more emboldened to give the band some marching orders, or is that the role that he just kind of played with any band on the label?
Absolutely any band.
Okay.
The Beatles could have come back with Revolver, and he would have been like, "But I just don't hear the single. Don't you think you could just work a little bit harder?" I think that's a pretty understandable, record company president tactic. And a lot of times that really works. Bands do go back to the studio and reassess what they've been doing and come up with new ideas. And a lot of times the last song you wrote becomes the best song on the record.
Yeah, you hear that plenty of times.
That was never a discussion on Do the Collapse, because it was a finished handed-in record.
Sure.
And I don't think he even felt like there was at that point, like, we paid a fee for the record, and if there were to be more recording, then it would be, would we get Rick Ocasek back? Do we rent out Electric Ladyland again? Like, it would wind up costing a lot more money. But for Isolation Drills, that was a typical tactic. But I will tell you that everybody thought right off the bat that Glad Girls was a hit anyway, so
Sure.
It probably wasn't as important.
And so Pollard finally came to the conclusion that maybe GVV wasn't the kind of band to have a hit. Do you agree with that? Would there be some sort of scenario where they could have had a hit? There were plenty of one-hit wonders from the alternative years. Why not GVV? What do you think sort of held them back from having a hit?
I really don't know. I think that a lot of it could simply be the fact that, like, whether it's 1999 or 2001 or 2018, like, you look at what's on the radio, and it's all major label artists. The industry may have collapsed in the last 10 years, and there are all of these DIY and SoundCloud and independent artist successes left and right, but they are not on the radio. They're really not. SoundCloud rappers can come up with songs and they have millions of YouTube hits, and those songs do not show up on hip hop radio.
Wow.
So it's just the way it is. Like, the industry collapsed, but the one thing that the major labels won was radio. They did not let go of their hold on radio. And so I think that we had strikes against us to be able to turn them into a mainstream band in the first place. Also, our radio department never really had big radio successes. We had isolated events here and there. We had the band the Canals. They had one song that came, that the song 74 75 that got on the radio. We did have Nine Inch Nails before my time. They had some exposure on radio, not like they did once they got an Interscope. We had this kind of Nine Inch Nails pop industrial knockoff called Gravity Kills, and they had one huge song that nobody remembers that was number one at K-Rock in LA. But I also think there's something that's sort of like there is something that to a more mainstream fan, Guided by Voices doesn't seem sort of marketable. And maybe that's their age and their appearance, their kind of perspective on things. It's like the indie rock mentality. But could another label have had a hit with Glad Girls or Teenage FBI or Hold on Hope? Yeah, absolutely. And I think that Guided by Voices have had songs throughout their career that with the right sort of luck and with the right sort of push, they could have had that. In the grand scheme of things, though, does it matter that they never became a huge mainstream band? I don't know. I don't know if I'd want to have to see them in gigantic venues, and I love going to shows where everyone in the room is a diehard fan, and there's not those kind of casual fans. And it's nice that they haven't had like a huge spike and then a huge decline. They've stayed pretty consistent for 100 albums. So, I mean, maybe, and Bob actually, he seems like he makes a perfectly good living being a songwriter. Is he sad he doesn't have, 5 houses? I mean, I guess you'd have to ask him. But in the grand scheme of things, they've done pretty okay as a band.
Sure. So let's talk about isolation drills for a second. So you suggested a bunch of producers, and he picked Rob Schnapf. How do you think he did on the record? This is obviously the first thing that they did for TVT.
Yeah, another like a new experience of Bob working with a producer. They again recorded in New York, and I don't know. I thought that Rob was a really great choice for the band. He really understood the sonics. He really understood letting the band be the band. Mm-hmm. He really understood how to communicate with them, how to get the best of them, how to push them without pushing them too far, and how to create a pretty laid back approach in the studio, because even though you're really on the clock, it never really felt so stressful. He had a good time schedule where the band would record for a certain amount of hours during the day, and then they were allowed to leave, and he would work on mixes for the rest of the day, and then they would show up in the morning and listen to the mixes, so there was like fresh conversation. So from my recollection, I didn't live in the studio, but for all the times I went and all the conversations I had around then, it was just a really positive environment. Also, everybody loved the songs. Mm-hmm. Everybody loved the way they sounded. Everybody was happy with their performances. Bob is a great rock singer. I think I think people who know it, but I don't think it really gets said enough. He's a great vocalist, and he really can, on a first take, really just nail the songs. Sure. And that band was really strong at the time. Jim is just a powerhouse drummer, and they were, Doug Gillard just came up with these amazing lines all the time. Like, they were just a really strong band, and they were really feeling really confident and strong. And I think even though like Hold on Hope wasn't a hit, like they were positive about the label. They wanted to make something that the label liked, and vibes were really good.
Yeah, how did you sort of patch it up with them? Obviously, you have that experience in Manchester that is not good. You maybe feel the tide has turned a little bit, or they're thinking of you in a different way. How do you get to a place to where you're making the second record? Everyone's feeling good. They're feeling good about you. How did you sort of mend those fences, if you will?
I guess I don't really remember any sort of reckoning that had to happen. I think time passed,
Hmm.
and I think that they knew that uh, that I am a real fan and advocate of the band, and that I was doing my job, and that when we started the next record. It was a fresh, some blank slate again.
Cool. So then, talking about Bob isolation drills, were you aware what was happening with him at the time in terms of his personal life? He was going through a divorce, and the record was kind of filled with all kinds of references to isolation. Was it apparent what he was going through, or did he just was it still sort of Bob as usual?
It was not apparent to me at all.
Okay.
We never had conversations about that, and it wasn't really until we got on the road touring that record
Hmm.
did it all really come out, because it wasn't just Bob. There was a lot of marriage dissolving and divorcing going on around then. They were also touring more than they had ever toured before, and gone more than they'd ever been before, and feeling isolated from their lives, and
Sure.
their wives and families feeling isolated from them. I mean, it's
What
it's really hard, to be on the road all the time and still and maintain these relationships. It's a really difficult proposition, and uh, I guess they had a good run of it for a while, but it all seemed to kind of come to a head around this record.
and what kind of drove that? Was that TBT wanting them to get on and expose themselves to more audiences? Was this them wanting to really make this big push to get on the radio? What do you think drove them being on the road more than they ever had before?
I think it was both. I think that they knew that we had the support. We were, from my experience working with Matador, because I later managed an artist who I signed to Matador,
Hmm.
and so I worked really closely with those guys again. Well, sorry, not again. I never really worked with them before. Um, uh, they are, they're really smart dudes, and they package everything right. And Matador has a lot of cachet, and simply by being on Matador, you get the audiences and the respect and the critics.
Sure.
But they don't really market records. Like when Guided by Voices is playing, in, I don't know, any town on their tour, we're advertising their record. We're doing point of sale where we're discounting the record and making sure it's way up front on all the racks, and we're advertising in the weekly that record's coming, and we're doing giveaways of tickets on all the radio stations, and we're really pressing them to do more press. And so we're really, city by city, market by market, we were really marketing the records. And I think that there was just a lot of momentum at the time. They were getting better offers, and their audiences were growing, and we were working the records pretty hard. And
Hmm.
I guess that was, it was never us saying you have to do this many shows, or why aren't you on tour. All of this
Sure.
stuff just happened
Okay.
the way it should.
And then, how did the band feel about how Isolation's drills did in comparison either to Do the Collapse? Was the expectations met within the label, within the band? How do you feel personally that they did in their time on TBT?
Well, so here's something that so what happened was the record came out, and the response was really great. The press was great. Glad Girls had again, didn't become a huge hit, but kind of did everything that Teenage FBI did. We were working on another EP, and the Chasing Heather's Crazy. We did a 7-inch, and it was all really good. And then for me personally, what happened was I had been at TBT for 8 years at that point, and I had a contract, and my contract was up, and I had been working. I started working at TBT pretty much the moment I got out of college,
Wow.
and after 8 years, I was like, I just really need a little bit of a break. I need a little bit of a vacation. And the record was out and there was momentum happening, and they asked me to re-sign a contract, and I said yes, I would, but I'd really like to take 3 months off.
Wow.
And do some traveling. So I made sure the record was delivered, the artwork was delivered, the campaign had begun, the video was made, everything was off, and then I took off. I kind of disappeared for a little while. I felt like they were in really good hands, and certainly I had set it up well at the label, but I wasn't there for the day-to-day of the touring and the promotion on Isolation Drills, so I can't really answer for what their experience was or what TVT's experience was. Then on a personal note, what happened was after 3 months of being away, I was traveling around Southeast Asia by myself, and after about 3 months where it was time for me to come home, I kind of just felt like at that point, like I was starting to enjoy myself. I was starting to have fun. I was really like getting into this whole traveling thing. So I let TVT know that I needed 3 more months. And so I wound up taking 6 months off. It's the only time in my life I've ever taken even remotely that much time off. It was an amazing trip. TVT told me that when I come back, they wouldn't be able to guarantee my job would be there for me. So I certainly was had a lot of freedom.
Sure. Yeah.
And then when I came back, it did seem like Isolation Drills did its thing. Sales were good, but I think that maybe TVT saw that if they did a third record, it might not have the same sort of returns as even Do the Collapse of Isolation Drills, and they wanted to put their energy and focus on things that would sell many, many more records. And so there became this sort of, we just didn't take the option on the third record, and it was sort of never like we're dropping you. There was no bad blood at all. It was just that maybe we can't do what you need for us. Maybe you can't do what the label needs. Everything is good, but we're not going to take the option.
Okay. And then when GBV left TVT and, as Bob put it, went crawling back to Matador, do you think that was a smart move? They'd been talking to other labels. Sub Pop, was talking to them. That seems like a great move. Why do you think they wanted to go back to Matador? Why kind of repeat the past?
Comfort. And it seems that by that time, Matador had relented on their idea that they would be the exclusive label for Bob. I mean, at that point, Bob's label had taken off, and he was able to do things on Matador and do things himself, which is what Bob always wanted in the first place.
Sure.
Maybe if he had that at the beginning, he never would have left Matador in the first place.
Yeah. During the ensuing years, did you continue to follow the band or Pollard's solo careers? Would you run into him from time to time? What was that relationship like, and what do you think of that stuff?
I would still continue to go to every single show I could. I did always see him at the shows, and afterwards, we had good nights of Italian food at La Mela and drinking after shows, and same with the rest of the band. And for a good long while, we were in touch a lot. And then I do, because now I have kids,
Sure.
I go out less and I see them less, but I still see the band at least once a year. And I feel like I'm right back in that place again.
That's awesome. And then
screaming along to everybody else in the audience.
I love it. I'm there too. And then finally, so do you have, Space Gun or August by Cake? You've seen this new lineup. Like what are your thoughts on how Pollard manages to be this good for this long? I mean, I'm blown away by his recent stuff. It's as good as some of the other stuff they've done in the past. Would you have thought 20 years ago that he would still be going at it, or that the quality would be this high?
I guess there would be no reason not to, right? Because he was doing it well before I even knew about him. There's no reason he wouldn't be able to do this until the end of time. And it's true, like, the output is still staggering and the quality level is still so high. I guess maybe for me now that I'm much older and I've kind of been a part of their lives for so long, for me personally, I start to hear ideas being repeated more than I had when I was younger. And maybe that's just maybe it's just my own perception, or just now I've just heard so much music. So I wind up like not kind of having that same kind of level of obsession and fandom as I had when I was younger.
Sure.
But I still just find Bob to be such a remarkable artist. There's really no one else in the world like him, and it just is staggering what he's able to produce year after year after year.
Wow. Well, I am glad you mentioned Brian's Jonestown Massacre before. I must say, in preparation for our talk, I did get out my copy of Dig the other night and watch it again.
I'm sorry.
Are you still in contact with him? What do he's making music. He had a new record come out just this past week.
Yeah, actually, I am in touch with him. We still, Anton's good at email and texting. We are in touch. I see him. I see him every once in a while. I still go see the band as much as I can because it's just like I do kind of I kind of cringe at nostalgia because I feel like there's so much good music, new music all the time, that looking backwards is not always the healthiest impulse.
Sure.
But I do find that when I go to a Guided by Voices show or go to the Brian Jonestown show, even if it's my 40th, 50th, 60th time seeing them, it's like, I don't know, it must be what church is like for other people. Yeah. Like it's just a warm, inviting, comfortable place where it brings me, it sort of brings me back to all of my memories from every other time I've experienced this, and it kind of connects me with the music that has been the most meaningful for me through my life. And it's true that Anton has gone through phases of being prolific and not prolific, and phases of being more experimental with the sound. I love the phase that he's in right now.
Yeah. He's
making these kind of classic sounding Brian Jonestown Massacre records. The shows are always great because his bands are always great. He's another one that I'm just so grateful to be a footnote in his story and be a part of helping bring the music to hopefully a few more people than maybe had known about him before.
Oh, 1,000%. I mean, and you're in the movie, for God's sakes.
I am in that movie, for God's sakes. The movie I just find hysterical because if Andy had not been filming that band at all of those moments she got on camera and was filming them at completely different times, it would have been the exact same movie.
Yeah.
That certainly she played with chronology, and definitely the rivalry is a bit more kind of made for movie than really like a day-to-day reality. But the footage that she got of the band is incredible, and it really was like that all the time.
Wow. So back to Bob for a second as we sort of wrap up. Any great sort of Pollard stories where you felt that you got to see something as a fan that sort of illuminated some characteristic of Bob that you would not have been able to have access to if you were from the outside, or some great moment?
One thing that I remember is that we did have him do some things that were very industry, studio sessions and radio interviews and meet and greets and things that were kind of an anathema to bands like that, but they were always open to it. And one time, one of the big distributors at the time, the people that the record labels would sell to distributors, and the distributors were the ones that were putting it into the record stores, was called Valley, and they were out on the West Coast. And we did a thing where the band would play a mini concert for the Valley employees, and those are the most awkward things in the world. And nobody wants to do them. I even wonder if the employees really want them, or do they feel obligated? But it's just something you do. And for some reason, Bob and the band said they would do it. And and it was actually it was breakfast. So like
Yeesh.
before work started. So I think their set time was 8 a.m. Before work started. We as the label would pay for breakfast for the whole company, and we set up a stage in their cafeteria, and the band would play a set. and we so we did that, and the band agreed, and I got there at about 7 a.m. and Bob was already there, and he was in their little conference room quietly pounding beers.
Wow.
Because that's how nervous he would be in doing things like that. And I don't know, I found that sort of moment to be a real kind of like, it really showed that like they were really trying, and we were really trying. And probably something that never happened before and will never, ever happen again.
Wow. And again, I want to thank you for the work that you did with them. Those are two amazing and great records, and thanks for everything you did to bring the band to more people.
Right on. Adios. Bye.
That's it for this special edition of Self-Inflicted Aural Nostalgia. Visit everygbvlp.com to listen to past episodes or to subscribe to future episodes. I'll return next week with a new episode looking at a GBV LP. In the meantime, I want to thank Adam Shore again for his time. Bye, everyone.